Hello, John.
Hello, Alva.
And so today we're going to talk about the decline of local newspapers. I listened to a podcast there by Padraig Conlon. It was actually Darren J Prior was interviewing, I think he's the editor of the Dublin People. And he was talking about how Amazon affected newspaper distribution in Ireland because Amazon during the pandemic were buying up all the paper for cardboard so they could do all their deliveries to homes during the pandemic. And so that drove up the cost of paper from 300 euros a ton to 900 euros a ton. And as a result, newspapers actually went out of business both in Ireland and the UK and the US and various other places. So you can see that the actual newspaper industry, it can be very fickle. The margins are quite low. It's very important that we have a paper newspaper. It's very important we have local newspapers, particularly for democracy, which we'll be covering in another video. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, the first thing is that Amazon should be in some ways sued for this monopoly situation that has forced up the price to such an extent, and to such an extent. And quite frankly, that's not the way that it should be done. If newspaper proprietors and publishers were buying up for £300 a ton, it doesn't seem right that it should jump in the space of a couple of years to 900. And this pandemic, which seemed to be orchestrated for the purpose to see how they could control the populations, shall we say. So there's another story there somewhere along the line that hasn't been investigated fully from the point of view of the economic effects of that, because it affected other areas of economics and the freedom of people and so on and so forth. I see people in some places still wearing masks, and I don't know what's wrong with them, what they're suffering from, perhaps anxiety neurosis. But suffice to say that it doesn't seem right. There should be some method of controlling the like uh, newsprint or the cost of newsprint for newspapers. It shouldn't jump to that extent, quite frankly, unless there was a shortage worldwide for some reason. But to think that Amazon, which is owned by one individual, as far as I know, a fellow called Bezos, whose mother was a single 16-year-old student. And if it was nowadays, he wouldn't be born. But that's another story. But the fact that they have this monopoly, I think that that should be the first thing to look at.
Yes.
So as
Okay. I'm going to
the newspaper,
I'm going to
yeah,
offer a very simple solution, okay, to solve this issue. And it's a very simple one, right? Amazon do
yeah,
deliveries all over Ireland, all over the UK, and all over the world every day. And they're never told at the door, take back the last package. I don't need that. That's not going in my bin. So what I would suggest is that Amazon have packages that can be reused. Okay. So that when they do a delivery, okay, the person will say to them, okay, you gave me a book last week. There's the package for that. I'm giving it back to you. And that package can be reused. And that's a very, very simple solution so that paper doesn't end up costing 900 euros a ton and putting newspapers out of business. So reuse.
correct. Well, if Amazon is the cause of that, they should be held to account. That's the first thing, as far as I'm concerned. That no monopoly should, the like of Amazon, which is a big company but private, should be held to account, because no way should raw material necessary for the printing of newspapers go from 300 to 900. That's kind of ridiculous. And that's the first thing, that Amazon should be held to account, irrespective of people sending stuff back and all the rest of it. First of all, there's a limit to this business of sending stuff to people like that, because it's probably doing out businesses as well, local businesses and so on and so forth. So monopolies are bad, and this Amazon has overstepped the mark. that business. The same as in various other centres, people are demanding some kind of what would I call it? Fair
Yes,
play,
yeah, absolutely.
and Amazon should be held to account straight away for if they're responsible for this monopoly of potential newsprint. It shouldn't jump from 300 to 900. That's ridiculous, and that's the first thing to do. And I think to be sort of given in or to that situation doesn't seem right to me. I mean, I wouldn't want that to go because of this pandemic from 300 to 900. It's actually dreadful. So it'll affect the price of newspapers, I presume, because it'll have to be passed on. But so there you are. We're in a situation that the monopolies are always bad, and we have it in the health service, and it causes problems. Problems. Monopolies are bad. You need to sort of what they call decentralize and have places operated by provinces or what have you, rather than a monopoly situation. So it fits all because it doesn't.
That's it. Well, one thing we discussed before is how the church, the newspapers all over Ireland criticised the church. They really went into overdrive with it, and this has also affected the newspaper industry in Ireland. If you remember going back to rural Ireland a couple of years ago, everything was built around the church on a Sunday, a Saturday, and a Sunday, particularly Sunday, and there was a huge newspaper industry in small towns in Ireland where people went to mass, they got the newspaper, they got two or three new newspapers, and they brought them to the pub, had two or three pints, and they went home. I mean, that was the whole thing was the industry was actually built around mass on a Sunday.
It was, and churches were packed, and but unfortunately, the people in charge suffer from some kind of confusion, or they had an agenda, perhaps, because what they did was empty the churches, quite frankly, and the vocations, which we even had so many vocations that a lot of them are going to the missions, and seminaries were full. Now seminaries are empty and some of them have closed. But they don't seem able to sort of the bishops even that's there at the moment. They talk quite frankly rubbish. They don't seem to be able to focus on what was done. You can't do what was done and expect a congregation to follow suit. You can't take out altar raids. You can't have the priest where he faced the tabernacle suddenly with his back to the tabernacle. That would seem to be like a sacrilege years ago in my time. And church was full. And if you didn't get there, even in Dublin, in the like of Rathmines, where there was a big Catholic church there, and Turnure and Rathgar, they were full, and there was no such thing as a mass on a Saturday. That was a time for preparation, we'd say, and a day of rest, and a time for reading the newspaper. Often the newspapers on Saturday had nearly more news because people sometimes only bought the paper on Saturday and Sunday, sometimes. And so they got the news for the week as well. There was that aspect to it. And then people that were in business had the newspapers during the week because there was business news as well that was important to them. So the papers were pretty well rounded as regards the way they approached the customer base. But between the churches emptying and what the bishops did, and they don't seem able, the present bishops seem able to sort of realise where the mistake was occurred and go back to the drawing board where it was successful before. With the newspapers, they want to avoid this business of with an anti-Catholic bias or an anti-Christian bias. You can't do things like that because even though people are not practicing the Catholic faith the way they did, they still have and they still have it. And I think if things were done right, they'd be back. And the Christian TV Ireland, the project, our objective will be to sort of develop programs and situations that will encourage them to come back. And certainly, when Mass is celebrated, when the Christian TV get going, it'll be the priest facing the tabernacle. He might be saying Mass in Latin, but even if he's saying Mass in English, he'll be still facing the tabernacle, and he'll always have altar servers. And they can be adults, they don't have to be children. And dressed in a soutane and suppers, and the sort of conversation directed to bring back all those lapsed Catholics, because they can be brought back, but they're not getting the message, as far as I can see. There's no talk about the sacrament of confession. Sometimes you see them talking about the sacrament of penance. When you go to confession, you get penance. You might get a decade of rosary, or you might get the whole rosary if you have missed mass for quite a while, which was considered a mortal sin in my time. So these are all factors that's the visit of people that fell away from going to mass on a Sunday the way they did. To have this visit of the evening mass, and I think people used to say, "Well, I was at mass this evening," when they weren't there on the Sunday, and that was no benefit, because on a Saturday you got yourself ready sometimes for Sunday. You might have gone out in that, but you certainly didn't miss mass on a Sunday, because as I say, churches was packed and confessions was packed. So you were encouraged to go to get the sacrament of confession. You don't hear the word about it nowadays in the way in the ordinary parish churches, and they should say it, and they should be in their confessional box. I think some of the places now I don't see confession boxes, so I don't know what way they hear confessions, if they do at all.
If they do at all, I think that's the answer there.
Yeah,
So look, I think the government should really think about what's happening in the Irish newspaper industry, and they should think of ways, and of course, it's up to the Irish newspaper industry as well to produce solutions that they think would help them to exist in a
correct.
in a more modern, developed world. But the thing is, it's a very simple thing there, what I said, and I think any newspaper editor could see it as well, is that Amazon needs to start making packages reusable.
Well, they need to sort of exactly, and they if their behaviour is affecting the price of what newspapers have to pay for the raw material that they produce their papers on, because you often saw in papers, and I see it in when I look at a certain thing called Remnant, and they produce a paper as well. There's a good few years of Catholic paper, and you can see the presses, the papers going along in all these presses. And I remember in the Irish Independent. I worked there for a small period as well in my time, and the newspaper, that's the way it was going. You see them going, and print. It was very unusual, and there was typesetters and all this, and it was a great way of doing it. Now, some of that has changed, of course, with the digital business, but quite frankly, the government are, but if the government starts assisting them in some ways, then their independence is gone. That what the government would need to be doing is that the cost of newsprint, it should be the like of Amazon should not be permitted to buy up so much that has put the price up. So what is Amazon paying for what they use? Are they paying 900 a ton,
They would be,
or what are they paying?
they would be.
Well, you see, that's crazy. There's a reason other than the monopoly of Amazon doing that. There's probably other ones doing something similar that we haven't heard about, but it needs to be looked at so that the cost, that raw material cost, doesn't go from 300 to 900. That shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah, well, I think like you mean every country, if it, every country should have its quota of how much cardboard it's allowed to use.
Correct. Yeah,
so that
and
it doesn't affect the newspaper industry because you couldn't possibly have that or allow that to happen in a society, in a democratic society, that Amazon is using all the cardboard. Sure, that's ridiculous.
well, it is, and it needs to be broadened and looked at from the point of view of the necessity to have newspapers because they give employment as well, of course, and people get the news. The reading is often better than the television in some ways because the television is edited. You know, the news and the television for half an hour, so it has to be just in little snippets, and sometimes they spend a bit too long on one subject. But the newspaper can give the background. There used to be the Irish Times when it was under a fella called Gageby. It was very good. And your man, Martin, who was the brother of Archbishop Dermot Martin, his brother was an atheist. And he was the Moscow correspondent for the Irish Times. So when he was a correspondent in Moscow, so and then they might have a correspondent in Rome. No, I don't know if they did. They had one in Moscow, anyways, and and London as well. So these are all plus factors with newspapers. But television is short, isn't it? The news, and then you get a documentary, and it's focused on a particular agenda, and oftentimes anti-Catholic agenda. So who wants to hear about that? Especially if you're a Catholic and practicing Catholic, and you want to save your immortal soul. You don't want to listen to that rubbish from them, but you won't hear it from Catholic Christian TV when it gets going. It'll be a straightforward, truthful message, and it'll uplift. And when the news comes on, we won't be focusing on the problems here, there, and yonder. There's enough yapping about that. We'll be trying to focus on where things are happening for the better of people, uplifting them.
I think that's it now, John Malone.
But the business of the newsprint, yeah,
I think we have
the
said
business,
enough on the subject, and we've offered
yeah,
solutions, and I think we've done a good job.
correct and right.
So I thank you very much, and we will move
I
on to our
bid you
next video.
adieu, and I thank you very much, Oliver. And we hope we continue another discussion after this. Bye
That's
now.
great. Thank you.